So apparently, women are dying because men are afraid of breasts. Yep. Well, that's interesting. I'm going to walk you through something that one of my staff sent to me, which I thought was pretty interesting. I did a bit of a dive on. And yeah, I'll tell you the categories kind of I'm going to walk through here because this is probably going to be a bit of a longer video. And some of you will probably find this interesting. I also have notes because I need notes for this. There is a petition in the United Kingdom right now that is asking for female mannequins, so like a first aid CPR mannequin, to be introduced into first aid courses. And specifically, I'll read the petition for you now, exactly the wording for it, and we'll come back to this. The government should implement minimum standards for first aid training providers to ensure every trainee practices CPR and first aid on a mannequin with female anatomy. So the key things in there being the minimum standards. So it's going to be across the board and every trainee needs to do it and they have to female mannequin. All training providers should be required to include anatomically accurate female mannequins alongside standard male mannequins. So the ask here is for all first aid courses at all levels, essentially, to have you train on both a male and a female mannequin to make things equal. Now, the reason for this, which I'll get into a bit more detail later, is basically that there was a study and there was some observations that more women would not make it to discharge from a hospital. So they wouldn't, from the point of having cardiac arrest, receiving CPR, etc., they wouldn't make it to getting out of the hospital alive as often as men did. So more of them died, basically. And the reason for it that this petition is proposing, or a primary reason they're proposing, is because people don't know where to put their hands on a woman when they're doing CPR, because they're essentially, the way that they phrase it is, and the way I've heard it argued from the people who've made this petition, is basically that people aren't comfortable with female anatomy, so they should be exposed to it. But the way it's been taken online is that people, basically men are afraid of breasts, and because they're afraid of breasts, women are dying. There's a lot in this. There's a lot of different moving parts, and I'm going to kind of walk you through the different parts of this. So we'll make sure that we have links to all these studies in the petition and what's being talked about so that you can review it for yourself, or you can, pause the video, bring it up, and go along with us kind of while we're going through this so you can see what I'm talking about. If anyone is watching this who's never read a study before, then this might be an interesting adventure for you. We'll put links to all this stuff so you can kind of get what's going through here. So we're going to go over an overview of the petition, talk about how current CPR training affects this petition, because I'm going to make an argument about what should or should not be done with this petition. We're going to go over the overall situation of how out-of-hospital cardiac arrest works, some of the stats on that, who's dying, who's not dying, some of the competing variables in this, and you'll see what the point of that. We're going to go through the cost of training and mannequins, because they're talking about effectively here introducing new mannequins to first aid, and there is another impact there. I've trained first aid for more than 10 years. Prepared Canada, the company, has provided first aid for more than 10 years. I have been both the employer, facilitating the courses, paying the salaries, and doing all that. They're not really salaries, they're contract technically, but I also pay salaries. But I've been on the employer side of this, and I've been on the first aider side of this, so there's quite a few moving parts depending on the perspective there. And then I will address the sort of internet arguments that have been made around this, because frankly, they're the least relevant when it comes to this issue, and they've received the most attention from what I've seen around this, including from the people involved in the petition, as far as I can see. Normally, I don't make, and we don't make, arguments on policy on what should or should not be done, because usually when you come here, we want to talk about, this is the lay of the land, these are the facts, you make up your own mind on what you think, and we try not to say this is right or wrong, or get into advising on policy. Usually if we're advising on policy, it's for a client. This is mostly supposed to be educational. In this case, I am actually going to make an argument about what should be done with this, And for that reason, I'm going to put right at the front here sort of like the abstract or the kind of what my conclusion is going to be, and then the rest of the video is going to support what my thoughts in it are. This petition has had an interesting response to it. The lay of the land right now between men and women, especially politically in the United States, I think many would agree is fairly divisive. Not from all men and all women, of course, but it's clearly more divisive. I'll get into that a bit later, but that is kind of a piece of this. When you look at the potential benefit that this petition or proposed policy change would have, and you weigh it against the negative consequences, on net balance, it appears to me that it is likely, or at minimum a significant enough risk, that this petition will end up net resulting in more people dying than you would gain from the improved training from the mannequins being introduced. Basically, this petition, I think, if the intent is to help more women survive cardiac arrest, actually will have the opposite effect of resulting in less women surviving. So I think it actually goes against its own interest, but there's a very specific set of reasons why, and they may be addressable, but I got to kind of lay this out because of what's involved. But that's where I'm going to end up. Just, I wanted to be full up front here, none of this, wait till the end of the video stuff, but that's kind of where I'm going to go. And it actually has nothing to do with the perception around this and the social media part, and more with some of the specifics I'm going to get to earlier. Okay, petition overview, the overall understanding of what this petition is. So I read it once, but I'll do it again just in case, so we can get the exact wording of this petition, because I want to be fair. And John, please, if you can put up the typeface of this, or the type of this beside, so that everyone can read along if necessary, because words matter, especially when you're proposing policy. Some of these things are taken very literally. So the government should implement minimum standards for first aid training providers to ensure every trainee practices CPR and first aid on a mannequin with female anatomy. All training providers should be required to include anatomically accurate female mannequins alongside standard male mannequins. That's the brick there. The source study for this was university students taking what's known as a BLS course, a basic life support course in Spain. The fact that it is in Spain is not particularly relevant. You could look at the difference in training standards between countries, but these are nursing students taking a BLS course. That's kind of the major thing here. This is relevant and matters. In first aid, there are multiple levels of training. BLS, basic life support, is generally the highest level of training you can access as a layperson. Anything in excess of that, usually you're getting into highly specialized medical training. You could go out and take a BLS first aid course, but BLS first aid courses are not the standard for what you would need for work, for example. Usually for work, you're going into a level A or a level C, a level A being the CPR component for adults, A for adults, and C in Canada, for example, being child, where you would be trained in adult, child, and infant. If you're going to work in childcare, for example, you'll usually have to take a level C, because in addition to needing to help your coworkers for labor standards, there will be a special duty of care to children that you're assisting with while you're, being their guardian, because their parents are at work and you're taking care of the children. Like teachers, for example, will often, in some jurisdictions, require a level C. Generally, your labor regulations will require some level of A. You'll have to take a first aid component of bleeds and stuff, and then for the resuscitation component, you have A, C, BLS. BLS is for nurses. This is relevant because when studies are done, they have specific findings that mean specific things, and extrapolating off the finding or trying to inform policy off of something that it's not directly saying can be dangerous. We've talked about this a bit in other videos, like the ones with correlation and causation and some of the other ones that we've done. But in general, when science is done, they're saying a very, very specific thing, and I would caution making huge policy changes that can have a whole bunch of other effects when the study might not say exactly what you're looking for. For most studies, the most responsible finding would be to say further research is needed in this area, whatever the area would be. The finding from this that the petition particularly comes off of is when they did the study, and it was reasonably well designed. It's a fairly small sample size for the conclusion, but given what they're looking for, that makes sense. I don't have particularly massive issues with the study's design as far as the study is concerned. The main finding that they had was that when students went from working on male mannequins to female mannequins, the students had errors where they would not do CPR correctly on the female mannequins, even though they'd just been trained on the male mannequins. So basically, these nursing students, even though they were trained one way and they went to the other, there was still an issue. They didn't have familiarity. And the implication, what is implied by this is, had the female mannequin not been there and the person was only trained on the male mannequin, then if they went from, instead of male mannequin to female mannequin to responding on women in the public, if they just go from male mannequin to responding to women in the public, they haven't had that learning in between, and they would have made the same error on the woman in the public that they made on the mannequin. That's sort of what's implied here. There are a few issues with that, and that has to do with the way first aid is taught and differences in standards across countries and a few things there. I'll get to that in a different section, but that's the main finding that's being taken off of here. So because it was found in some nursing students in Spain, someone in England said, well, if nursing students are having this issue, then it's reasonable to expect that lay people will have this issue, and it is true that women tend to not survive a cardiac event as often as men do. So this looks like it could be a reasonable explanation for this discrepancy. We should do a policy change. That is the general idea behind this that they're going for. Other than that, if you want more detail, we're going to link the study. You can read it more. If you have follow-up questions back and forth, no problem. I'll do a follow-up video on this if people ask for it, but that's just kind of the general idea with the study and the petition overview. What in CPR training affects this? I'm going to make sure that I kind of structure this point by point. In the first 10 minutes, certainly within the first 30 minutes of any first aid course that is meeting a minimum labor standard. In Canada, the UK, I believe the States, all the countries that I've seen standards on, I've been exposed to. Within that first time period, you are going to discuss implied consent. It is guaranteed. If you do not discuss implied consent as a first aid instructor in that first time period, it is a level of error that is almost unbelievable because of how many other things in your course are going to be based on implied consent. I would think that if a first aid instructor actually didn't cover implied consent in a course, there would need to be, at minimum, corrective action within their employment. Someone who, checks them on standards or something, there would be a red flag on it. It is to me inconceivable that a first aid instructor would not cover implied consent. Implied consent is the idea that if an individual goes unresponsive, if they are not sleeping, but they are at risk of, they're in a life-threatening breathing emergency, essentially. They may still be breathing, but if they're unresponsive, it's considered a life-threatening breathing emergency. That even if they denied you consent before going unresponsive, you have consent to do, and I'm going to read the exact words here because this is relevant. They have the consent to do whatever is necessary within the limits of reasonable skill and care to preserve the casualty's life. Okay. Reasonable skill and care to preserve casualty's life. CPR, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, baring of the chest, cutting of bra, shaving of hair if necessary to put defibrillator pads on, removal and destruction of necklace if necessary that's worn to save your life. CPR is clearly, by any definition, within the bounds of reasonable skill and care for someone who's in cardiac arrest. And all that is required to determine cardiac arrest in the public is head tilt, chin lift, check breathing. They head tilt, chin lift, they check breathing, 5-10 seconds, you're not breathing. It is understood that in first aid, you bare the chest, you do whatever is necessary, and you're doing CPR. So the idea that men are afraid of touching breasts, and that means that their hands are going to go in the wrong location, and the reason they're afraid is because of legal consequences. The legal consequences are stated at the very start of every first aid course. After implied consent is discussed, it's also brought up again and again and again during the CPR practicals. Like, this isn't just said once, it's repeated, because you go through a scenario, the person's unresponsive, and they say, okay, they're unresponsive. You have implied consent. Check for, like, it's just, we reinforce it all the time. After that is discussed, still within the first 10, at worst case, within the first 30 minutes of a course, something is discussed called Good Samaritan legislation. In Canada, in the UK, in a lot of countries in the world, but certainly in Canada and the United Kingdom, there is Good Samaritan legislation. Now, Good Samaritan legislation is stuff that basically reinforces that implied consent. And the idea behind it is, if you are the Good Samaritan and someone is in a life-threatening danger and you go help them, you are protected legally. Your government essentially protects you through this legislation from negative consequences if you were using reasonable skill and care. This has extended to beyond criminal conviction. This is extended to small claims court. It is so rigorously, it is such a rigorous piece of legislation that I myself and every single instructor and other person in this industry that I have ever talked to in Canada has never heard of a case where someone was successfully sued for performing first aid. It has never happened. This, to me, is the big takeaway. This should be right at the front. If people are concerned, if this is the claim, that people are worried about legal repercussions because of performing first aid, no, it doesn't happen. But there's still the argument it could. Fair enough. I'm going to work through this for a second. If after receiving a first aid course, look, if you haven't had first aid training before, if they haven't gone through this explanation, they haven't tried to instill confidence in you and that you're okay to help after all this, if that hasn't happened, it's reasonable to me that someone that isn't informed on this would be like, I don't want to do that, I don't want to get sued. Fair enough, that's reasonable. I get that, especially in the current climate, which we'll get to later. However, if the individual has received first aid training and they still don't have confidence in this, one of three things has occurred. One, the government is incompetent and Good Samaritan legislation is not strong enough to make the first aider confident that they can help people without legal repercussions. And this could be the case. It could be the case that the person says, you know what, I don't think I'm protected enough. I don't want to go to jail. And that means that the government would not be doing enough to make people feel comfortable helping. And the medical industry would be very interested in that, and people who are interested in helping people want you to feel safe legally from disease, whatever. It's one of the things we cover in the first 30 minutes. So if you are still not confident in your legal protections from this, we want to know that, because then we go, okay, what do you need? What more do you need in order to feel okay with this? Because if we go through all this training, we do all this work and teach you these skills, and then due to fear of legal repercussions, you watch someone die in front of you, we should do something about the law so you don't have that problem. It could be the government, number one. Number two, it could be the first aid trainer. It is very possible that the first aid trainer did not cover this. Now, I have never seen that. I have never seen a first aid trainer not cover this, but it is possible that some of the fear of legal repercussions or consequences due to this are from bad first aid trainers. That's possible. I don't think it's likely, but it's possible. You know, I don't know every first aid trainer in the world in every country. I know what I've been exposed to. It could be the case in your area, I'm not sure. But so it could be the government, it could be the trainer. Number three, it could be the individual. Look, some people, no matter what you tell them, no matter how much weight you have behind them and know how much support they have, they just don't want to hear it and they're not going to believe it. Now, I don't think that's the case. With all of the students that I remember training and with the exposure that I've had, people tend to be confident in what they're doing. I haven't run into that issue, and I find that what people generally lacked when they were worried about this was they lacked someone who was willing to take their question in seriously. For example, I've had students who will say, well, what if I touch their breasts? Am I going to get sued? And then students will laugh. And the onus is on me, the instructor, or whoever the instructor is, to say, time out, time out, time out, time out. First of all, I get it's funny because boobs. Okay, haha, I get it. But you try to take it away from it being about them. But like, look, that's a reasonable question. In fact, I get that question half the time in this course. Like what you've done is you've actually asked me a question that is going to help me cover something that I'm going to have to cover. Thank you. You've increased class engagement. This is not a bad thing. And frankly, you want that question because it gets it out there and people are thinking about it. But the onus is on the instructor to help that student feel comfortable asking that question and to address that question appropriately. And if you do so, then they go, oh, okay. No, that's reasonable. That makes sense to me. Thank you for respecting my question. If the instructor laughs at the person and says, you're fine, don't say something so dumb. You do that, you're going to alienate the student and you're going to make them not feel confident. So look, if you're watching this and in the comments, you've had a first aid course where the instructor had done that, and that was your experience, that was wrong. They shouldn't have done that. And frankly, that was counterproductive. So that could be the case. Fair enough. But look, it could be the person. Some people just doesn't matter what you say, doesn't matter how much backup they have from, the government protecting them, whatever. They're just not going to do it, okay? And frankly, some people, if the purpose of them taking first aid is to protect people in the public, they are not the type of people where that purpose can be fulfilled. Maybe the first aid's useful for them helping themselves or their family, but they just ain't ever helping somebody in the public. That's just the way they are. And that's their choice. That's their choice, okay? And trying to kind of dance around this or force the opinion on them with facts is a waste of time. Why would you? I just wouldn't even bother, okay? That's the piece on what first aid has to say about this. For this next part, I'm going to talk about out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. I have some numbers here and I want to confirm with them and a list, so I'm going to kind of read it because I don't want to miss something. Cardiac arrest is when the heart goes into arrest or the heart goes into some form of problem that can lead to death. So the heart has an irregular rhythm, the heart starts beating too fast, too slow, it gets odd. The heart starts basically doing something that it's not supposed to do. That's kind of the simple version of cardiac arrest. In-hospital cardiac arrest generally means medical help is right there and they can respond to you quickly. Out-of-hospital cardiac arrest is generally the kind of situation where you need to identify that you're having a heart attack or a stroke or something leading to the cardiac arrest as early as possible. It's something where, depending on how long it takes for the person to begin CPR, if they stop breathing or they have lack of breathing, lack of pulse, depending on your level of training, how long it takes for that to start. There's how good your paramedic service is. Some people have access to very advanced paramedic services where they're at their house within 8 to 10 minutes or faster. Some people have paramedic services where they live in somewhere that's a bit more remote, or there's one central hospital servicing a whole region where the paramedics might be 45 minutes out. Out of hospital cardiac arrest is specifically, you just heart attack and you drop in the middle of a mall somewhere, there's delays and there's stuff in there. When I'm saying these stats mean something very specific. Out of hospital cardiac arrest, 7 to 10% of people who have it survive to discharge. Now, when you say survive to discharge, and this is where a lot of these stats are going to come from, that means that they went into cardiac arrest, they go to the hospital, they see the doctors and the nurses, they don't have a do not resuscitate order, and then they're treated and then they leave. If they die at any point there, they go in the statistic of the 90 to 93% of people who do not survive and don't make it from cardiac arrest to discharge. Here's why this matters. Here are other factors that contribute to that 90 to 93% of people that don't make it to discharge from having a cardiac arrest that are not CPR being done properly or improperly. So the main claim of this petition is basically the CPR isn't done well enough, and that explains a significant enough number. I'm telling you the other variables that are in that number. You have how long the delay is from cardiac arrest until CPR begins, which could be related to the comfort thing, but I'll get to that in a second. You have the effectiveness of the responder's CPR, which is the thing that was being discussed. You have if a defibrillator was present or not, and if it was used in tandem, the numbers on CPR being done on its own and someone successfully making it through the whole process, are less than 5% on a good day. The numbers of CPR being done within the first minute or two, plus a defibrillator being on simultaneously within the first minute or two, survival rate goes to 75, 80%. So the defib being present or not with the CPR is a huge difference and really affects these numbers. How rapidly 911 is activated, how good the paramedics are, and there's a whole bunch of different subcategories there because the paramedics could have issues with traffic, they could have issues with their own training. There's a whole bunch of different components that go into the level of efficiency of the paramedics, how effective or efficient or how well trained the hospital is. Did you get driven to, a cardiac hospital? Did you get driven to a hospital that basically doesn't do this? If you have a doctor that doesn't do CPR, try to give you CPR, generally speaking, the nurses and the paramedics have to receive training every year or every 3 years at worst, depending on the jurisdiction, in CPR so they're used to it and they can do it. Doctors who don't have the subspecialization may not have done CPR for 30 years. If you go to a hospital where they don't see CPR all the time versus a hospital that's specialized in cardiology, your chance of survival is different. Does the patient have a do not resuscitate order? This would be number 7. If you have a do not resuscitate order that says, if I stop breathing, don't resuscitate me, then what may happen is the first aider will resuscitate you because they're not a doctor, they're not enforcing that. The paramedic will probably resuscitate you because they're not a doctor, they're not enforcing it, depending on the jurisdiction. And then generally, when you get to the hospital and the doctor's there, or a medical professional who can administer one of these is there, they will say, oh, they have a DNR, stop compressions. If you die because you told the hospital to let you die, you are counted in the statistic of people that did not survive to discharge because that was your intent. So there are a lot of different things in here. By the way, women apparently have a higher rate of writing DNRs. So all of these factors can be complicated between men and women. Now, women have 3 specific components that factor into these stats that I want to talk about because I think this is relevant and this directly ties into how complex this issue can be. Number 1, their symptoms are different. So, when first aid is taught on how to identify a heart attack, usually what was taught many, many years ago and may still be the case in some countries around the world is the symptoms that you tend to see with men. Ones where they have chest pain, tightness of chest, I feel like an elephant is sitting on my chest, some indigestion, arm pain, that type of deal. That's what's going to be said. Women have different symptoms generally. They both can have these symptoms, but when you look at things that are specific, things like back pain tends to be a symptom you see in females more than males. The symptoms are different. The way I teach first aid and the way a lot of people in my area teach first aid is different than this. So what we will say is we'll go over symptoms on how men and women receive it. But in general, frankly, if you have anything wrong with you between the jawline and the end of your digestive system, you got anything in there that is steady or persists for a long period of time, so you're talking about, you have chest tightness for like 3 hours, you have just solid jaw pain or back pain for 3-4 hours, and it's the same or gets worse. You're not having like radiation of pain that goes away and comes back. You're probably having a heart attack. And if you're not having a heart attack, you might be having some other sort of organ failure, so you should go to a hospital anyways. This is the type of thing that not everyone trains in. That is a modification in first aid training that you could do on trying to talk about more generalized heart symptoms or change the way that's provided that may have an effect on early recognition that could affect women positively. That's this one thing that I want to bring up. There are some changes that people could make to first aid to help alleviate this issue that aren't the Manikin thing this petition is proposing. So that's one. Another thing, women tend to dismiss their symptoms more than men. They tend to underplay their pain. They tend to be concerned for others, but not themselves. Generally speaking, when it comes to their own health and wellness. This is a phenomenon that has been well explored, but once again, this is quite generalized because everyone's different, but once again, generally speaking, when a man has a cardiovascular event, he goes, yeah, no hospital, I'm going to the hospital. When a woman has a cardiovascular event, she tends to downplay it. This means that cardiovascular events like angina or small heart attacks will go undetected in women for longer. So women will basically accrue damage, and then when they finally have an event that causes a cardiac arrest, on a 1 to 10 scale, the man probably got concerned and went to go to a hospital when the cardiac arrest was like a level 2, and the woman did it when it was a level 7. Like, the severity of the condition is different. It is easier to survive a cardiac event that is less severe. And when you downplay these things, it can impact you. Now, in first aid, we discuss the importance of early recognition. We discuss the importance of not denying your symptoms. The distinction between men and women is not particularly relevant because everybody should care more about whether or not they're going to die from a cardiac event. That would be good to know. You can have a heart attack, so a clot in your artery leading to parts of the heart muscle dying, generally speaking. You can have a heart attack up to 4 days before you go unresponsive. Going to a hospital, 4 days before you go unresponsive, it's a lot easier to manage it then than once the heart muscle's been dying for, 3.5 days. The early recognition piece is important, and women disproportionately dismiss their own symptoms. This heavily affects the numbers. Okay, with females in particular, there's something called microvascular disease. So they can have clots and blockages and things that impede their cardiac function in smaller vessels. Everyone can, but it's more common in females. They will be much harder to diagnose and detect. So you may be concerned about your problem. You may be concerned about your cardiac health. You may go to a doctor. You may go to a cardiologist that is looking for it, and they may miss it simply because it's harder to detect. This is relevant and affects the stats. That's kind of like a general overview of a lot of this. At the end of this video, I'm going to end up unpacking a bunch of mannequins, and I'm going to demonstrate some of this stuff too. I didn't want to do that in the middle because that might take some time, but that's the general part of the out-of-hospital cardiac arrest situation, which I thought you guys would want to know because it affects this. Cost of training in mannequins. Mannequins are expensive. When you're running a business, you have fixed costs and variable costs. Your fixed costs are the things you buy once, your variable costs are the things you have to keep buying repeatedly per use. Mannequins are generally a fixed cost. You buy enough mannequins to store in a warehouse or to store in a training depot so that you can have them taken out by your instructors so they can go to locations and teach. For a startup, mannequins can be pretty expensive, but you have to pay for storage. You have to manage these mannequins. Mannequins are going to be, depending on the mannequin, anywhere between $100 to $300 Canadian per mannequin until we start getting into medical grade. Once we get into medical grade mannequins doing certain things that are beyond just basic compressions and dealing with like fluids and blood and whatever else, the numbers get really high. Even like a basic life support jaw thrust mannequin, you'll usually get them bulk. You can get them for between $250 to $300 Canadian per mannequin, and you're buying in bulk. First of all, if we're talking about buying female mannequins for every trainee, if we only used female mannequins, it would be a one-cost thing. We'd kind of like swap them around or phase them in. That'd be different. If we're talking about doing a one-on-one, so half of you have male mannequins, half of you have female mannequins, that'd be different. It wouldn't be as expensive. We could kind of like phase out old ones, buy new ones. The petition is asking for every trainee to have a male and a female mannequin. Unfortunately, in first aid, you can't share mannequins. In basic life support courses, you do what's known as a bag valve mask or bag valve mask work. So this is a bag valve mask, okay? When you're doing bag valve mask works and you're doing resuscitation, the breaths, you put the mask on the face and you squeeze, okay? This will let you share mannequins. When you teach level A's and level C's, you have to do mouth-to-mouth resuscitation because it's not considered realistic to expect lay people to be able to use a bag valve mask. One, they probably won't have access to it because you'd have to have them everywhere and they aren't everywhere. And two, that airtight seal with the mask, it's not reasonable to expect every layperson can do it for like a workplace course they take once every 3 years when they don't do this stuff every day. Okay, it's just not happening. You're going to be training mouth to mouth. If you're training mouth to mouth, you can't share mannequins because then you're having people breathe through the same mannequin. And public health basically won't let you do it. You could theoretically clean all these mannequins between every use. It's possible, but then your cleaning costs go up. And frankly, you don't have the time in the course to do that. And also, frankly, people just don't want to share this sort of thing. And doesn't matter how good your medical sterilization is, if they're watching you clean it, there's somebody who will think it's not clean enough, and that's going to derail your course. It's not practical. You either A, have to double your mannequins, or B, you have to drop rescue breaths. You don't have a choice in between them. You could theoretically have only mouth to mouth on one mannequin and then not on the other, but there's a problem with that. Practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. There was a training organization that was teaching CPR to people who would be doing it. And the way they would train, they would use other people, they wouldn't use mannequins, and they would have you go on your friend, and they would have you press on their chest on the right location, but not deep enough. And then they'd have you go to their face, turn their head and say, breathe, breathe. They worked this into muscle memory. And then when these people went to respond to actual people who needed CPR, they would press on the chest the amount they pressed on their friend, which was not enough, and then they would physically turn the person's head and say, breathe, breathe, because they reset into muscle memory. It is not practical when you're doing life-saving style training because you're assuming the person's going into panic mode and they're falling into training, what they're automatically trained in. It is not practical to just say, well, just imagine you do it and don't worry about it. Don't put your mouth on it. It's not practical. If you're going to train this properly, you have to give everyone a male and a female mannequin if you're going to do this petition. You have to double them. Or you just have to say, you know what, we're not breathing. So you could do compression only CPR, fine, but the problem is all the resuscitation data on this has shown that compression only CPR should be a last resort. If the trainee can, you should have them breathing. So you have to make a choice now. If you're not going to double the mannequins, do you drop breathing and do compression only CPR, or do you not care about using male and female mannequins? And I am pretty certain, I'm not 100% certain, but I would hypothesize that not training the public in rescue breaths is going to result in less people surviving than giving them both male and female mannequins. Now, if you're in a jurisdiction where you don't do rescue breaths, whatever, female mannequins, doesn't matter. Because you can just put one in the room and have everyone have one turn on the female mannequin one time. But that's not practical. You're going to have to do another full 2-minute 5-cycle on them. You don't, like, what are you doing? They have to be trained properly. So that's one piece of this in the sort of debate of how you're going to manage the mannequins. Second thing. So on these mannequins and the cost, you're not just spending money on the mannequin itself, you're spending money on the cleaning equipment as well. If you double the mannequins, and at this point I have to assume that the proposal is talking about doubling the mannequins. If you double the mannequins, you have to clean double the mannequins. This means double the isopropyl alcohol 70 or 99. This means double the chlorine bleach. This means double the soap. This means double the water use. All of your variable costs for mannequins doubles. Well, okay, with the chlorine bleach, you can probably reuse the water a bit more. That wouldn't double. Your isopropyl alcohol cost is doubling for sure. Depends on how often you want to clean the water, change the water. But generally speaking, the way you clean one of these mannequins is you take the mannequin, you soap scrub it, you soap water scrub it, then you submerge it in bleach so that everything inside the mannequins, everything gets just killed. And then you scrub it again if necessary. That standard changes depending on where you are. And then you dry it with isopropyl alcohol. And you leave that to basically dry. That's kind of like the minimum for what you're doing for cleaning these things. That cost is going to increase. The margins on first aid are very, very thin. There isn't a lot of money in first aid. Most organizations that do first aid are charities or organizations that do it because they just want to provide it as like a loss leader or because they just think it's important and want to put it out there. But these are generally people that are either charities or kind of have a charitable mindset. There is not a lot of money there. Any cost you increase is going to go to the cost of the training automatically. You don't have any margins. If you increase the cost of the training, that goes to the customer. You don't really have a choice. People already don't want to take first aid courses because it's too expensive or takes too long. Sometimes they're forced because their workplace forces them to, but many workplaces will say, you know what? That's too expensive. I'm just going to take substandard training and hope I don't get audited. And there are first aid companies that exist that knowingly don't follow standards. And if they were audited, there would be some serious penalties from a regulator. But that's the world we live in. So if you increase the cost of first aid training, you are going to have the training providers that are providing the stuff that's to the standard you need increase their costs. You don't have a choice. And that it means that less people that would want to take first aid optionally or would want to take first aid that is to the standard will take it. That is a problem because now, because we're increasing costs, less people are taking first aid. And the number one factor when it comes to people doing CPR properly in the public or performing CPR properly in the public is, in my opinion, the number of people in the public that have been trained. And you really do not want to force that number in a negative direction. So I view anything that looks at causing significant cost increases to first aid training with very big amounts of caution. It's not that you would never do it, it's just you really want to make sure that you're going to net benefit people and it's worth the drop off in people that won't want to take it now. That's really important. Same thing with time. If your first aid course goes too long, people won't want to take it. People don't have the time in the day. They might have done like a 7-hour course. They might have done a 14-hour course. 16, they won't do it. You move it to a 9-hour and an 18-hour course, they're really not doing it. It's just sometimes that 1 hour, I got to catch my bus, they're not taking your course. These things matter when you roll them out over an entire population, which is what standard changes like this would do. Okay. You have a limited time to teach this stuff. So this is still related to costume training and mannequins. First aid used to be a 1-week course. It used to be like 40 hours, and they reduced it to about 2 8-hour days. You have lunch and break in there. It's standard first aid with CPR level A course is looking at basically 14 plus minus half an hour of content, test, whatever. So that's roughly what you're looking at. Nothing was really removed from that. They just took 40 hours and did this. And then you have to basically teach the same stuff. There is not a lot of wiggle room for the instructor in first aid. You are going fast and you don't want to miss stuff and you don't want people to not learn something because, Murphy's Law, that one thing you were a bit too fast on ends up being the thing that, they have a family member that has that emergency 2 years and 6 months after their last course because they're on a renewal in 3 years and the emergency happened 6 months before they were going to see you again. Okay, that's what's in the back of your mind going, I can't skip burns. I can't, dislodged eyeball never happens, but what if they're at, a baseball game with their kid and, the bat and boom, pops out. I need to teach it, right? Whenever you increase the time required to do something in first aid, you are negatively impacting the quality of what's being provided because it's so tight, the content's so tightly packed. People also have a limit to how much they can take in. So very careful with how you add stuff to timelines. Adding in a whole new mannequin potentially ends up being a huge time block. It depends. At the end of the video, I'm going to assemble a bunch of mannequins in front of you and show you what that looks like, show you how long that takes, and start walking through kind of the way some of these things would be timed so you can see what I'm talking about. But whenever you add in more mannequins, you're adding in more assembly time, you add in more practicals, you're adding in the time to run the whole demonstration, the practical, etc. These things take time. Just kind of keep that in mind. I want to talk about what you're actually learning and what you would gain from these mannequins. When you teach somebody where to put their hands in CPR, which is predominantly what you would gain from the mannequins. If you're afraid of touching a woman's chest, touching a mannequin isn't going to do anything. Think about this. It's like you're afraid of touching a fork because it's a foreign object, so I give you a model of a fork so you can touch it so you're not afraid. Like, this is not what we're talking about here. This is not the issue. The issue is that they don't know where to put their hands. They're okay with touching the chest. They don't know where to put their hands. If your issue is men are not comfortable touching a woman's chest, the mannequin's not going to do anything. That's not a woman. If you wanted to fix that, you would create courses having men touch women's chests. Good luck with that. When you instruct on how to perform CPR properly, there are many different methods that are done. The older method was basically you explain where the sternum is and you explain where to put your hands specifically on the sternum in such a way where they're not on the solar plexus and they're touching on the lower end of it, basically. Sometimes people use nipple line as a guide. Using nipple line as a guide doesn't work because stuff sags. It works for some people, but for other people, it doesn't. So what you can do, what does work for everybody, and what's been trained in first aid for 10 years, is take your hand, put it in your armpit, and bring it across your chest. Armpit across. Hand, armpit. Palm across. Press down. Where are you? Lower part of the sternum. Man, woman, doesn't matter. Armpit across. That's it. You do not require any further realistic explanation, especially at a basic level A course. Okay? It's armpit across. Hand, armpit, do that. That's it. It occurs to me that if someone is being trained in first aid and they're being trained on that sort of motion, it would not matter if it was a man or a woman, or a male or a female, it would not matter. They would just put their hand over and they would be on the right spot. Like this should not be this complicated. It is possible that in the original study, they were training to locate based off of measurement from belly button, and they were doing basically ruler ratios, which is an old style. And I can see why that would cause errors, but I didn't see in the attachments or in any of the things that were given in that study the precise way they instructed on hand placement. They just said they did by meeting a standard. That's a problem. Because if they do this, I have never seen a student make that mistake. I have never seen it, okay? They mark on themselves. When you do choking and they do chest thrusts, assuming they're on a pregnant person, they do a chest thrust by going underneath and putting their arms out and then doing this. It's armpit across. Like you drill this in resuscitation. This is not complicated. So anyways, sorry, as you can tell, I'm interested in this topic. Look, armpit across exists. Why is this necessary? Okay. Let's go over the internet controversy. I tend to try, and everyone has faults, no one's perfect. I tend to try to approach everyone with good faith, and I try to assume the best intentions. So what I think has occurred here is someone identified that women are disproportionately dying from something, and they found a study that seemed to explain a contributing factor from this, and they said, hey, we should do something about it. And all, best intentions, and a petition isn't necessarily, hey, let's do it, I'm demanding. A petition is just, hey, let's talk about it so that we can have the experts weigh in, which is completely reasonable. You can put petitions forward and say, hey, why don't we talk about this and discuss it? And then it turns out data comes out and it gets shot down, but maybe something new comes from it and you learn something. No problem, right? So completely good faith there. I have no particular issue with this. Like, it's not like I haven't seen anything really bad faith coming from the people who made this petition. It seems like the goodest intentions are in place here. I haven't done a huge dive on it, to be fair, but that's my initial perspective. Having said that, the response to this petition from the internet at large has largely been essentially, why are you telling me that women are dying because I'm afraid of breasts? And I can see their argument and the perspective there. Because with the way this appears to have been communicated and with the things that have, really not that have been said, but have been left unsaid, I can see how someone would go, so wait a minute, now it's men's fault that women are dying because we are afraid of breasts? I can see how someone gets there. So with that in mind, I'm going to give you some kind of context on the state of men and women in kind of the divide on the internet right now and a bit of American politics, because I think it brings context to this situation and helps inform this. There is a significant concern after the Me Too movement that men are worried about false accusations of assault or any other number of things in that sort of category. This should not be news to anyone that is familiar with stuff that's happening on the internet, but if it is news to you, fair enough. Many men are very, very afraid of basically being mislabeled something that they are not and having their lives destroyed. They don't necessarily view this through a legal lens. So we're kind of diving deep into a specific risk here. They don't necessarily view it through a legal lens. They view it through sort of a life destruction lens. And there are different ways in which their life can be destroyed. There can be court case, jail time. It could be social ostracization or removal from their social groups because of, a post on Facebook. It could be from whatever. It could be loss of employment or job because even though there's no legal consequence necessarily, the sheer rumor of something results in the employer wanting to lessen their risk of being associated with somebody like that, right? So I can see the fear there. Now, whether or not that fear is statistically rational is irrelevant. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that 3 people a year in a country actually have this happen to them that we see on a statistic. To the person viewing the risk, they're not going to care. It's not going to be relevant. When you look at the way people view these sorts of events, their assumption is, I don't want to deal with risk that could happen to me. Why take a risk that I don't have to take when there's nothing for me in it? Let's walk through a scenario for a second. You're walking through, the mall, whatever. Someone's on the floor and someone's injured, and they require help. There's other people around. There is a 1 in a million chance that this person is generally unhinged and is going to try to ruin your life when you help them. 1 in a million chance. You help them, what are the consequences, positive and negative? You might get some people clapping for you. You might get featured positively on the news. Some people say attaboy. Your employment's probably not going to change. Your positive effects from this may or may not change significantly. Your day may be interrupted and delayed. Probably nothing bad will happen. Your life could be over. You do nothing and walk by. No one is going to care. No one is going to really tell you that was a bad thing. You're another person in the crowd that decided not to help. Now look, I have training. I'm going to want to help that person. That's my personal choice. Why does any given person want to take that risk? I can see the risk calculation going. I get where that's coming from. When you look at how men are viewing this risk, what matters is the perception. The reality doesn't really matter. This isn't a rational choice based off of stats and data that we're making. If we were to approach it from a rational choice of stats and data, like, only this number of cases have been successfully shown where the person was accused and blah, 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 you could say, well, what percentage of the people that were successfully charged was it actually they just had a bad lawyer and we'll never know because they're in jail now? I don't want to be one of those where we find out in 30 years the person was actually lying. What percentage of these things never become court cases and we never see reports on them? Any sort of question like this will speak to a variable where the relevance of the statistic doesn't matter. They don't care. What matters is this is the perception of the field as it stands. In recent history, in addition to Me Too, there are other things that have occurred. There was this app that came out called Dating Advice, where from what I understand, the original intent of the app was to give women a way to basically tell other women of dangerous men. So if a woman dated a man and he assaulted her or something to the effect, then she would be able to basically send out an alert to all the other women on this app that this guy is dangerous. Now, this included personal details about the man. This essentially was viewed as ethical doxing in the interest of protecting women. That's kind of the initial pitch there. They sort of made it so you could only join the app if you were a woman. They required like a driver's license or proof of ID in order to join, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that was the claim of the original intent. The effect of it was, there was some of that, yes, but there was also basically just blacklisting of men from the dating pool and doxing. So that happened. They got hacked, as in the Dating app got hacked, and because they had all of this data on all of these women, that got leaked, and all of these women then got basically blacklisted by the internet as insert some sort of negative thing they would call them. The general resounding response to this was from the internet. There was multiple responses, but the overall response from this was they got what was coming to them. We are in an environment where the sort of dating reality for people who spend a fair amount of time on the internet is such that they're concerned about both sexes doxing each other, and where there is so much vitriol and so much anger built in there that people are basically going, yeah, you got what you deserve. And they go, yeah, well, you're a insert profanity. This is a lack of trust, to put it lightly. This is not the type of environment where someone is likely to trust that the other party has good faith, that they have their best intentions in mind. This complicates this significantly. This sort of stuff is rampant. You may have not heard about this. This might not be something you're aware of. When you think about the sort of things that people are interacting with, some of their reactions start to make a lot more sense. Does it matter how many people this was? No. What matters is it happened, it was news, they viewed it and they went, that's happening, that's not cool, I don't want to get myself in the way. That's where they're going with this. Another one, which you may have heard about because this one kind of went everywhere. There was a woman is trapped in the forest and she can choose whether she's trapped with a man or a bear. What does she choose? And of course she chooses the bear. This went everywhere. And the response to this from not men, just in general, many women too, the response to this from most people that I saw that didn't spend a lot of time on the internet was, well, that's not reasonable. The bear is going to eat you. Why would you do that? But there was actually this huge kind of battle of the sexes on the internet about, this is generalized here, men basically saying, hey, are you kidding me? That's a bear. It's going to eat you. I can't be that bad. And then women going, no, you are that bad. Now, is this all women? No. Is this all men? No. But the people that have, high engagement and the people that share this a lot and get a lot of eyeballs, people tend to click on things that are kind of rage baity. That spread to the top. And that's what people were looking at. That is what the narrative became. This is at the front of the mind of a lot of men. If you look into manosphere, the red pill community, etc., and you look into the types of things that they're concerned about, you look at the size of some of these movements, this is top of mind for people. And this is a problem. When people are concerned, hey, I don't want my life to be destroyed because I wanted to help somebody, the response should be, you received training on this. If you didn't, we should find a way to make it so you can. The trainer should have told you, or the government has made sure that there is a law that is in the place where that doesn't happen. We're not talking about you bumped somebody in a shopping mall here. We're talking about life or death, and there is a special legal exemption that is given specifically to protect you in this case. They need to know that. In addition to that, because there's the part of this that isn't legal, let's be honest. If someone was caught on video performing CPR, which is pretty obvious, and then it went viral that they were receiving negative consequences, can you imagine the doctors that are content creators, the medical associations of the world, the public writ large, coming to their defense and going, are you kidding me? They were trying to save the person's life. The public would be so outraged at the idea that someone is receiving negative consequences for performing CPR that it would be a joke. I think that it is reasonable to say to people, no, 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 no. Okay, the context is such that no, the people have your back on this. This is not a political issue. You were trying to save their life and they were unhinged. Okay, not unacceptable. Absolutely unacceptable. You are good. We like you. They should not be trying to penalize you for you touched my chest. Yeah, your heart stopped. Okay, come on. Now, when I'm saying come on here, once again, looking back at that training thing, I'm not dismissing the concern from the men. I'm saying that the people, if this actually happened, the people seeing this would be outraged. Not at the man, at the person trying to penalize them for saving their life. Absolutely outraged. Okay, you would go viral. No, inconceivable. Okay, if this has happened to you, and it's on video, please let us know in the comments. I would love to do a follow-up. No, absolutely not. Categorically unacceptable. If you want to help save somebody's life and you're in a country that has Good Samaritan legislation, some countries don't, but if you're in a country that has Good Samaritan legislation and you want to save somebody's life and you've had training and you go do exactly what you were trained on, no. There are so many people that will come to your defense, it's unbelievable. So they need to hear that. They need to know that people have their back. Not across political lines, doesn't matter. This has been blown so far out of proportion, it's ridiculous. When I first kind of read the stuff happening around this, as you can probably tell from my passion here, it made perfect sense that it would happen, but also, come on. Why is this the battleground here? Like, the person's heart has stopped, guys. Why is this happening? Why is this back and forth attack necessary? I see men, well, people saying they're men, there might be bots, who knows, on the internet saying that they have significant concern about this, and then they're being dismissed and being told, well, it will never happen to you. No, it might not ever happen to you, but if it does happen to you, don't worry, we got you. Okay, like, refocus the message, please. Please, this is completely unnecessary. So, summary, and then I'm going to show you some Manikin fun. I don't think this petition, as it's currently written, based on how I understand what's being asked for, it should be implemented as written. I think you could modify it, and maybe we could look at the different ways to approach it, and maybe there's something there. I think there are some issues with it as it appears now, but maybe it has some merit with some changes. In general, laws already exist to solve the majority of the problem that is surrounding what this is trying to fix or appears to be trying to fix. The first aid training already addresses this, and in general, men being afraid to touch women's breasts, causing them to die, is basically a non-issue. There are other issues surrounding this that I could say are issues, and I'm not saying that your perspective doesn't matter here, but what I'm saying is when you're looking at maximizing the number of people whose lives are saved in this issue is not an issue. What is an issue is how many people are trained. Irrespective of the specific Manikin issue here, look, the vast majority of individuals, if they have a good first aid instructor, and the first aid instructor instructs them the way they're supposed to be doing, you don't run into this problem. You just don't. Most people are not trained. Most of the times you see CPR in movies, it's not done properly. Okay, there are very few shows I've actually seen that have CPR in them that actually do it properly. A lot of people are exposed to bad examples and bad training. This shouldn't be a problem, okay? There was a fun rant. I'm now going to show you some of this stuff. I have different Manikins with me here. These are all Preston brand because I personally just like Prestons, but you can use whatever. I have one that is a BLS, Basic Life Support Manikin, because we were talking about that, and I wanted to kind of talk about that. And I have 12 here, I think. The older ones that we used to use for the level A's and the level C's. Now, the Basic Life Support Manikin, this has already been constructed. I'll show you kind of how this thing is constructed. Okay, so we have this Manikin. You have to remove the chest plate in part. So we have to take this off. Okay. Because inside of it, you have a head and you have the bag. Okay. Now, this all has to come out. And this bag has to come out. Okay. This is going to come separate. So the heads will be stored one place and this will be stored another place. What you generally need to do is undo this. This is easier on a table, but I'm standing, or I'm sitting, so it is what it is. So you have to undo this. You have to take the head in some sort of position, lock it into a head tilt chin lift generally, take the bag, fold it so that it can be fed through without clipping this thing because you can't have the airway sealed, okay? You fold it and then you feed it through. Hope it goes all the way through so you don't have to do it again. Grab, come through, unfold, and try to make sure that this is not twisted, okay? This then attaches to the ears, the pseudo ears, little clips on the side of the Manikin's head. These like clips on the side of the head. This comes through. Okay. In, you secure, you pull through to make sure it's open, and then this has to carefully close and get reattached. You are doing that a bit faster. I was showing you stuff with demo. You are doing that one time per student. So if you have a class of 15, you're doing that 15 times. Now this is a basic life support mannequin, so you might be able to get away with only one for every 3 or 4 students if you're just using this one for teamwork. These other mannequins, you're doing 1 per student. And if you do a double up of doing 2 per student, because one's male and one's female, then this is twice the number. Okay, so keep in mind this is 12 mannequins. Okay, so we have 12 mannequins, and if this was, male and female, this would be 24. If I had a class of, 20 students, this would be 40 mannequins instead. So this would be 4 of these bags, which all have to fit into your car, be transported. If you don't have an elevator and you have to go up 3 flights of stairs, that's going with you, multiple trips. And many first aid instructors are elderly and are not good at lifting things. This all factors in. This bag is 20, 30 pounds. I can weigh it, might be more, I don't know, but it's 20, 30 pounds. You have to unzip it. We've got chests, lungs, springs that are used for the compressions, and heads. Okay. When you're teaching a first aid course, you are not supposed to have the students assemble the mannequins, depending on what area you're in. Some places have a standard where the instructor is supposed to be assembling the mannequins. Every additional mannequin you have is another one you have to assemble. This takes time. Your instructors are going to have 15-minute breaks and maybe a lunch. If they have too many mannequins to assemble, they either have to A, break a standard by making the students assemble it, or B, they have to cut into their own break time and they effectively don't have a break. Trying to retain instructors that don't have breaks is hard. There are already not many people who want to teach first aid. Having fewer people who want to teach first aid because you're giving them more work than they're willing to do for what they make is not good. Anytime you pressure employees or staff into more things that they don't necessarily want to do, you increase their workload. It can decrease their motivation to provide good training. This factors in. I can tell you right now, most instructors, I won't say all, most, do not like dealing with more mannequins. This is the annoying part of the job. Doubling this is going to make them not happy. I'm going to show you how you make 12 mannequins. If this was, 15 students and you wanted male and female, it would be 30. So we're going to assemble mannequins. Feel free to time this, John. Those are my good ones. Those are my bad ones. I'll take these out. There we go. If you're teaching a level C, you also need the same number of infant mannequins. So the infant mannequins, if you teach 15 people, you're doing 15 adults, 15 infants, and if you were to have adult male and female mannequins, male and female, that would be 45 mannequins. All of which, of course, once again, have to be sterilized. As a reminder, these are not the mannequins that we use anymore for first aid. The newer ones in Canada have electronics in them to assess people for compression rate and other data to make sure they're doing it properly. Those mannequins are similarly finicky for construction, but you are not going to just have someone put their hands on a mannequin for the sake of it. If you're going to use a different type of mannequin, you're going to run the entire scenario again anyways. You are not going to just have them put their hands on it for 3 seconds. You're going to have to make sure that they do the full 2 minutes properly, regardless. Some places in the world may still use these mannequins. I don't know of any in particular because I'm focused on Canada, but I'm certain that there are some places that still would. Canada tends to be fairly specific with its standards on this stuff. Canada tends to take a fair amount of pride in its medical industry, and first aid is taken fairly seriously in this country. So, nice thing. Okay. I also would be wiping my sweat down so it wouldn't drip on a mannequin, but giving you a rough idea here. So. Okay. Okay, up we go. Next table. Okay. And okay. We would then usually arrange them in an easy and or nice looking manner, in some way that is somewhat presentable and not just in a giant pile, so that students feel confident in our professionalism, etc. So you could pay for somebody to do all that for you, but then you gotta increase the price of the course because you gotta pay for a new person to be construction or cleaning. And if you do that, then less people take first aid. And everything is trending towards the direction of trying to make it so less people die. That was 12 mannequins. Now imagine it was 30. It's pretty normal to have a first aid course between 10 to 20 people. That's pretty normal. I'm now going to show you something. Manikin. I know first aid, can I help you? Apparently. Are you okay? Hello? They're not. 911. I finished that. Head tilt chin lift. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They are not breathing. I now have implied consent to do this. I had implied consent to do whatever within reasonable skill and care once I did this. When I said, hey, I know first aid, can I help you? And they did not respond, I had sufficient consent to check for responsiveness. Reasonable skill and care. Armpit across. I know this is the right location and it's armpit across because all of these mannequins are designed with a piston in the bottom of them that is exactly in that line. The male and female mannequins, they're the same. They have a piston or some sort of spring in that location. If I try to press up here, it blocks my hand. I have to do this. And now I'm crushing it, and the piston has almost broken through the underside of the mannequin. In order for me to push that piston down in the wrong location, I have to break the mannequin. Armpit across. This is not complicated.